Broncos country, welcome back to my final 53-man initial roster prediction for the Denver Broncos. Week 3 of the preseason just wrapped up where the Denver Broncos beat the New Orleans Saints. And while I was going to do a recap, I figured let's save those for the regular season. I want to get my final my final roster prediction out to you guys because roster cuts are going to be coming very soon and they're going to start happening pretty rapidly. So I just wanted to get my initial 53 out there. Then we're going to see how the roster moves plays out. And then I will give you another video on the initial 53-man roster. And remember, if you do enjoy this video, then make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel down below as the support is greatly appreciated. And with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump straight in to this video. So, starting off with the quarterbacks, I don't think this should be any surprise, and it is going to be Bo Nix as the starter. And before I continue, I just actually want to say that, remember, this is my opinion. I'm not a professional, and I don't claim to be. This is from my fan perspective. This is what my eyes told me when watching the preseason games, who I think should make the roster. It is going to be different than a lot of people because I think we all have different preferences, different players we like to make it in certain spots, specifically the depth positions. So if you disagree, that's fine. This is just my personal 53 mock draft. Geez, I need to stop saying that, but roster prediction. But yeah, let's jump back into it with Bo Nix being the starting quarterback. Jarrett Stidham being the backup. Those first two preseason games, he looked phenomenal. And I think the reason why he sat out in the Saints game is because they wanted to see what they had in Sam Ehlinger. Should they keep a third quarterback on the roster? And I get that. So it pretty much solidified Stidham's spot, in my opinion. But it sucks for him, just being the fact being that he's probably not going to get a whole lot of playing time this season. And so this is when you're a backup quarterback, this is when you're going to get a majority of playing time. So, it sucks he had to miss a game, but I do think Stidham is going to be the backup quarterback, especially with how he performed this preseason. And then I do think we're going to keep Sam Ehlinger on the roster. Right now it's a toss-up. Obviously, this is Sean Payton's third season with the Broncos as head coach. The first season, he only had two quarterbacks on the roster, with those being Russell Wilson and Jarrett Stidham. And then last year, he had Bo Nix, Jarrett Stidham, and Zach Wilson. So it's kind of 50-50 right now in his era with the Broncos, whether he keeps two or three quarterbacks. But with how all three performed, Sam Ehlinger, especially in the Saints game, I think he solidified his job as quarterback number 3 on this team. Then we're going to the running backs. J.K. Dobbins is my RB1, and I know he didn't play a whole lot in the preseason. I do think it is somewhat of a medical concern with J.K. Dobbins, obviously having that injury history. But I do think he is going to be one of the starters. I think it's going to be a 1A, 1B with R.J. Harvey, who also looked pretty fantastic in the preseason. And I do think he's going to split a majority of carries with J.K. Dobbins. I would say Dobbins and Harvey combined probably going to get like 80% of the carries. And then McLaughlin and the other guys are probably going to get like that other 20% if I had to guess. But I think that J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey are going to get about equal snaps at least to start the season. Then moving on, I do have Jaleel McLaughlin. I think in that second preseason game and the third preseason game, he really solidified his spot on the roster. The former undrafted free agent out of Youngstown State and Notre Dame College. He's kind of that elusive scat back. He's going to be a receiver out of the backfield. I kind of like that versatility that McLaughlin has. It was interesting to see who was going to make it out of this running back group, and I do like McLaughlin in this. A lot of you know I've been a big Audric Estime advocate this offseason, but quite frankly, I know he had a really good game against the Saints, but from the news that was being reported all throughout training camp and how the first two preseason games look, I don't know if Audric Estime is going to be returning to the Broncos for a second season. But we'll have to see. Because my fourth running back on the roster is Blake Watson. And I think this is a 50-50 shot right here. This is kind of a toss-up of who do you prefer? Do you want Tyler Bidet or do you want Blake Watson? And I would be fine with either. I think both of them are phenomenal players. I'm going to go with Blake Watson. He's a little bit younger, and I thought they both looked explosive. They both made big plays. I just like Blake Watson's contact balance when he's able to stay up after taking a big hit. He's able to stay up and gain those extra yardage. I just like that in Blake Watson. Again, would be fine if it's Beatty or Watson. I prefer Watson. If they're both going to make it, that's awesome as well. But I do have Blake Watson as my fourth running back. And then I do have Michael Burton making it as a fullback. However, I don't think this is a guarantee. I think it could either be Michael Burton or Nate Atkins. I know we signed another fullback earlier this week, but I think it's really between Michael Burton and Nate Atkins for who gets that fullback job. Right, Michael Burton is that pure fullback. That's where he's going to play, whereas Nate Atkins is going to be that tight end fullback hybrid, kind of like what we had in Andrew Beck a few years back. Then moving on to the receiving room, Courtland Sutton, I do believe, is going to be our X receiver. And I know Sean said in a press conference a few days ago that he doesn't really label his receivers as the clear-cut number 1, 2, 3, all that stuff. I'm just giving it to you how I think they're going to line up. And I think Courtland Sutton is going to be that X. Marvin Mims, I do think is going to be the Z opposite of him. I do think he is going to be that other deep threat that you're just going to throw to him deep, use his speed right on jet sweeps. We saw that towards the end of the season that Marvin Mims was utilized a lot more in the offense, and I do expect that to continue here in year 3 for Marvin Mims. Again, one of the best return men in the NFL, but that's not what we're talking about right now. We're talking about him as a wide receiver, and I do think he's going to get more snaps on the roster, as he is honestly one of the older receivers on the team, not including Sutton, not including Sherfield, but I do think Marvin Mims will get more utilization this season. Then at number 3, it's got to be Troy Franklin, who in this picture is dapping it up with Jerwan Newton, who I do think is an interesting player and I would love to see on the practice squad. So I guess that's a spoiler that I don't have him making it, but I don't think that should be a shock to anyone. But Troy Franklin really took a step up this season. We saw the reports throughout training camp and the offseason, and then we saw it in preseason game week 2. Troy Franklin had this breakout game. I do believe that Troy Franklin's going to get a lot more utilization in this offense, has a familiarity with Bo Nix, right? We said that last season, and then he sort of struggled to put it all together at the NFL speed, but hopefully he takes that jump this year. Had that really good game, as I mentioned. Do you think Troy Franklin is going to take a step up and get more involved in the offense this season? Then, of course, we got Pat Bryant as the number 4 receiver. Of course, after Devon Vele was traded to the Saints, which, by the way, I didn't cover that, but I was a little shocked. But at the same time, getting a 4th-round pick from the Saints, as well as the 7th in 2027, hey, we'll absolutely take that. That is phenomenal value for a almost 28-year-old second-year receiver, turning a 7th-round pick into a 4th-round pick. Tremendous value. But speaking of Pat Bryant, he had a really solid preseason as well. He was coming down with a lot of jump balls. I did think he struggled a little bit against the Saints, at least coming down with 50-50 balls and jump balls. But I do think Pat Bryant will get a decent amount of usage. It'll be interesting to see because Sean Payton typically doesn't like to play rookies, right? Bo Nix, obviously an exception as a rookie quarterback, but typically doesn't play a whole lot of rookies. So we'll have to see what the utilization is of Pat Bryant. And then I guess you could throw that in with RJ Harvey as well, who we mentioned earlier at the running back position. What's it going to be like for these rookies? Are they going to get a lot of playing time with Sean Payton? Or are they going to sit on the bench to start the season and then get more utilization as the season progresses? Then, moving on to number 5, we got Trent Sherfield, who actually climbed up a spot because he was making some plays in the preseason. He looked really solid. I thought Sherfield was going to be a guy who's like, okay, might get a couple snaps on offense, but is primarily going to be a special teamer, going to be an extra returner if you need 2 out there, going to be a gunner on punt coverage, on kick coverage, right? But he balled out, and I do think his offensive usage might go up a little bit. And depending on how many snaps Pat Bryant plays, I do think Sherfield could get a lot more involved in this Denver offense. And then at number 6, Courtney Jackson, man, he looked phenomenal this preseason, and I don't think you can ignore it. You're going to put him on here, and maybe he's going to play that special teams role that we saw or that we thought Sherfield was going to play, at least that I thought he was going to play. He looked phenomenal in the return game. And if you want to give Marvin Mims a rest, if you don't want to put him back there and risk injury, you got a really solid guy in Courtney Jackson. Maybe get some offensive snaps. Who knows? But as a special team player, I do think Courtney Jackson has really battled and is really competing for a spot on this roster. And obviously, in my opinion, I think he makes the 53. Then moving on to the tight ends, we got Evan Ingram, which, if we're being honest, is he really a tight end? Not traditionally, not going to put his hand in the dirt. He's going to be another receiver out there for the Broncos and be a dynamic playmaker. I don't think that should be a shock, though, that Evan Ingram, who's classified as a tight end, is going to be the tight end one for this team. But if you want the true traditional tight end, I do have Adam Troutman. He's going to be that hybrid guy who's going to put his hand in the dirt. He's going to play in the line of scrimmage. He's going to block. He's going to go out. He's going to go catch passes as well. He's going to be that dual threat guy. And Adam Troutman, I think, is going to be tight end one of the, I guess, pure tight ends who's going to block and go out for receiving patterns. Then you got Nate Atkins, who I mentioned earlier. I do think he's going to play this tight end fullback type of role for the Broncos, like what he did at the end of last season. But yeah, Nate Atkins is my number 3 tight end. And then number 4, we got Lucas Kroll, who had a really solid game against the New Orleans Saints, which means Caleb Lohner is not going to make the roster. I really wanted him to make the roster. He was a fun player, former basketball player. We all know what Caleb Lohner was coming into this season. He was kind of that dreaming on Jimmy Graham, 6'7", right, former basketball player, but didn't really pan out in my opinion. Dropped a screen pass, right, just wasn't the greatest in the preseason. Who knows, maybe the Broncos hang on to him on the roster if they still see the upside and the potential and they think he's going to get snagged off the practice squad. Maybe they keep him. But right now, for keeping the best 4 tight ends, I would say it's going to be Ingram, Troutman, Atkins, and Kroll. Maybe make an argument for Prescorn, but I do think that these would be the 4 if they keep 4 tight ends on the roster. Then moving on to the offensive tackles, the starters should be no shock to anyone, so I'm going to go over them really quickly. It's Garrett Bowles at left tackle and Mike McGlinchey at right tackle. And then as for the swing tackles, we have Alex Palczewski, right? Former undrafted player out of Illinois. The Broncos really liked him. And, you know, he showed flashes. He flashed in the preseason. I think he's a really solid player at the swing tackle position. And then I'm going to keep Matt Pert here as well, who played a dynamic role for the Broncos offense as well. Always reported as eligible when he came in last season. Not necessarily as a sub when he had a sub in for injuries, but when he came in as an extra lineman, he always came in as eligible. And I do think that the Broncos keep him around and just have 2 tackles behind the starters because, you know, tackles are some of the most important positions, obviously, on the offense. You want to protect your quarterback. So having Palczewski and Parrott as your depth pieces at tackle, I don't think that is too shabby at all. Then moving on to the interior offensive lineman, we got Luke Wattenberg at center, who did struggle this preseason, but he was pretty solid last season, so I'm going to just hope it's rust and hope he's going to be ready for week 1. And then you got Ben Powers at guard and Quinn Miners, the best guard in the NFL in my opinion. Obviously, I'm biased, but Quinn Miners is going to be the starting right guard for the Denver Broncos. Then for the depth guys, I have Clay Webb making it, the undrafted free agent out of Jackson State. Or what's it? Yeah, Jacksonville State. Yeah, Clay Webb. I think I'm getting... one sec. This is annoying me because typically I know players' colleges. What was that noise, by the way? But I got to look this up. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, Jacksonville State. Jacksonville State, that's where he went. I was right. But I liked what he brings to the table. Center, guard backup, thought he could be a 5th-round draft pick if it wasn't for the character issues that popped up after the draft. I think he's a solid offensive lineman. I think he makes the roster, as well as Alex Forsythe, who I have listed as a guard, can play center. Maybe he challenges Luke Wattenberg for the starting spot. I don't think so, but I do think he makes the final 53 as a depth interior guy. And then moving on to the defensive line, Zach Allen should be a no-brainer to pretty much every Broncos fan. Same thing with DJ Jones and John Franklin Myers. And then you got Savion Jones, the rookie defensive end out of LSU, right? Savion Jones, he showed flashes, and I do think the Broncos want to get him and develop him and get him a decent amount of reps, especially if they're not going to bring back John Franklin Myers. Because, right, you paid DJ Jones this offseason. You just signed Zach Allen to an extension, which thank you, because we needed that one. Your next contract extension, right, after you obviously signed Cortland Sutton too, is probably going to be to Nick Bonito. So John Franklin Myers, unfortunately, probably is going to walk this offseason, and that sucks to say. But you got Savion Jones developing in the wings, who you eventually want to be a starter. So I do think he's going to get a decent amount of reps this season. And then, of course, you got Malcolm Roach, who I do hope we bring back as well this offseason. Just a solid guy all around. Can rush the passer, really great at stopping the run, and was a big surprise for me this past offseason when we brought him in after his first season in Denver. I was like, okay, depth guy, can stop the run, solid, but he made a bigger impact than I imagined last season. Then moving on to the edge rushers, obviously you got Nick Bonito, who I was just talking about. I expect a contract extension to be done sometime soon. The number one edge, and he was a playmaker. Not only is he lightning quick off of the ball, right? As soon as it's snapped, he's off the ball. He's going to get to the quarterback. He's going to produce as a sack artist, but he's also a playmaker, right? Drop back in coverage, got a pick six, sniffed out a trick play, returned it to the house, which should have been a pick six, technically a fumble because it was a backwards pass. But Nick Bonito is a playmaker, clearly the edge one for this team. But Jonathan Cooper, man, he is a very, very solid edge. I think he's really slept on, honestly. I think Jonathan Cooper doesn't get as much love, right? Nick Bonito got all the attention last offseason, but Jonathan Cooper had a really solid season in his own right and is a really solid pass rusher in his own right. So the number 1 and 2 edge rushers shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And then you got Jonah Ellis, who really impressed me this preseason. He showed flashes as a rookie, but he looked really dialed in this preseason. Think he's going to be the number 3 edge on this team. And then the number 4 edge, who's it going to be? You got Dondre Tillman, you got Q Robinson, you got a couple guys. But it's going to be Q Robinson. It's going to be the rookie 4th round pick, right? He obviously had the stripped sack in the preseason game, forced the fumble, right? I thought he looked really good, and he was a guy who had all the tools at Alabama, just didn't have the production sitting behind guys like Dallas Turner, Will Anderson. Then when it was his time to shine, goes down with an injury, doesn't have the production, but he has all the tools and traits to be a very solid edge rusher, and he has shown it all throughout camp and the preseason, so I do think he makes it. Think we keep 4. Maybe you keep 5 and you cut another player at a different position, and if we do keep 5, I would suspect that's going to be Dondre Tillman, but for now, these are the 4 that I think the Broncos are going to keep on the roster. Then moving to inside backer, we got Dre Greenlaw, who didn't play this preseason, is still dealing with that injury, which if he's nursing it and he's going to be ready to go and 100% healthy by week 1, I'm okay with him not playing in the preseason because the linebacking group has been one of the weakest parts of the Denver Broncos defense for the past few seasons. So Dre Greenlaw coming in and being a healthy addition, right? And the key word is healthy, right? Obviously coming off of a scary injury 2 seasons ago in the Super Bowl. But if he can stay healthy, I think he's going to make a big impact on this Broncos defense. Got Alex Singleton, who again is also coming off of a torn but he's coming off of a torn ACL, so we'll have to see how he plays. But, he's a guy who's not going to impress you in coverage, but he's going to be a guy who gets after the quarterback, is going to get after the runners, going to be a hard-nosed to the football type of guy. Alex Singleton is the number 2 linebacker right now. And then you got Lavelle Bailey, who I do think makes the roster, right? Drew Sanders is injured again. He made the initial 53 last season and then was cut and replaced for someone else and then was on the practice squad. I think he actually makes it this time for the final 53. And then Justin Strnad, another veteran, former 5th round pick out of Wake Forest. I think he makes it in because when he did fill in for Alex Singleton, did he do anything crazy? No, but he was a solid, steady presence at the linebacker position, and I think the Broncos will keep that going into the regular season this year. Then for the corners, PS2, CB1, I don't got to say much more. You guys should all expect that. Same thing with Riley Moss. We saw what the defense looked like without him last season. Did he struggle when he came back from the injury? Yeah, he did, but he's looked solid throughout camp in the preseason so far, and I do think he stays as the CB2 for the Broncos because yeah, he looked really solid. And guys, I'm really excited about this corner room because you got Jahdae Barron, who, I'll be honest, you can substitute him out with Jaquan McMillan for who's going to be the starting nickel cornerback come week 1. I'm giving it to Barron, maybe just because I'm hyped in the first round rookie, but he's going to be a hard nose to the guy. He's going to tackle. He's not afraid to lay a hit on you, and he's also solid in coverage, right? He's got the good instincts. He's got versatility, and honestly, we could see him play safety at some point, right? We could see him on the field. We run a lot of dime packages. We might have 4 quarters on the field, so we might see him out there a lot anyway. Jahdae Barron, I am really excited about, and I can't wait to see what he does here in the regular season. And then you got Jaquan McMillan, who is a really solid slot. And like I mentioned earlier, he could be the starting nickel corner. It just depends on how you see it. Him and Jahdae Barron, this is a really impressive cornerback room. Surtain, Moss, Barron the rookie, McMillan, who's been really solid, struggled towards the end of the year, but has been really solid the past few seasons and in the preseason. Then you got Chris Abrams-Drain, who's looked phenomenal in the preseason as well. If these are your 5 defensive backs, I guess they're not your only defensive backs, but if these are your 5 corners, I'm feeling really, really good about this corner room, right? Surtain, the best in the business. Riley Moss, pretty solid number 2, and last year was his first full year starting, so here in year 3, hoping he improves and takes another step. Jahdae Barron, obviously a first round pick, should have gone a lot higher in the draft than he did. A hard nose to the football type of guy, very instinctive player. Jaquan McMillan, who has been one of the better slots in the entire league for the past few seasons, and then Chris Abrams-Drain, a second year player with a lot of upside and potential, who looked really well in the final starts that he got down the stretch of last year and in the preseason. So this cornerback room is looking dangerous. Then we move to the safeties. Brandon Jones, right, made a big impact last year, and kind of with Malcolm Roach, made a bigger impact than I was expecting. Then you got Talanoa Hufanga, the free agent signing. Again, hopefully he stays healthy, and he did play in the preseason, which was nice to see, and hopefully he's going to be 100% come week 1. Then you got PJ Locke, who was a starter last year, and I think as a solid veteran presence who knows the defense in that locker room is going to be a nice piece to have around. Then you got JL Skinner, someone who I am still super high on and I think is going to be a very valuable special teams player. That's where he made his impact, and I think he's a phenomenal special teams player. He's going to be a hard-hitting safety. He's going to lay the boom on you, but he is a very solid special teamer, as is free agent signing Sam Franklin Jr. I do think he makes the roster as well, and the Broncos keep 5 safeties. Now, like I mentioned earlier, maybe you cut one of these guys, only keep 4, and then you can add to another position group, but this is my prediction. So this is what I think is going to happen, and these are the safeties that I think the Broncos are going to keep on their roster. And then you got the specialist. You got kicker Will Lutz, who I don't think this is a surprise to anybody. A surefire kicker. I don't have any. I don't have heart palpitations when our kicker goes out because I trust Will Lutz. Then the punter is Jeremy Crawshaw, and I know a lot of Broncos fans are giving up on Jeremy Crawshaw. I'm not giving up on Jeremy Crawshaw. Maybe it's because I really like Jeremy Crawshaw coming into this draft. He was like the only punter who I would have drafted in this draft, and the Broncos obviously did. And I said that before the draft even happened, right? I mentioned Jeremy Crawshaw in a mock draft video, and I think the thing for Broncos fans to realize is, well, one, Broncos fans, we give up on players way too easy. If something doesn't happen immediately, it's like, oh, this guy sucks. He's done, right? And we cast aside a player, right? A majority of the fan base, a large vocal majority of the fan base does that, and it's a toxic trait about the fan base that I don't like. But it is a part of the fan base, right? And if you do feel like Jeremy Crawshaw sucks, that's fine. I'm not going to police your feelings about it or anything. But I think the important thing to remember is when you drafted Jeremy Crawshaw, right, he could kick it deep, but he didn't have the hang time. So it would get down the field and it would go deep, but it was too fast, so the coverage team didn't have time to get down there, so it would result in a big return. So the thing you had to do with Jeremy Crawshaw is you had to work on the hang time, and this isn't an excuse, right? And I'm thinking he's gotten better every preseason game, but he's got to get the hang time up to let the coverage team get down there and cover. as well as still kick it deep. So I think he's still learning how to do both of them. I think he's going to be fine. I think he's going to get settled in as the season goes along, but has struggled so far in the preseason. But I still do believe in Jeremy Crawshaw. And then the long snapper is Mitchell Fraboni, who we signed to a 3-year contract extension this offseason and has been the long snapper for the Broncos for the past few seasons as well. But that is my final 53-man roster prediction for the Broncos. Let me know what yours is in the comment section below. Make sure you leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you did enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Parker, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace out.